discussing what we call the trainer maxim. While everybody was paying attention to how much rents were rising last year, not as many people were really focused on what was happening to operating expenses. And they went up quite a bit too. We just finished our annual study of auditing about 1,000 properties worth of year-end statements. And apartment expenses went up 6.3% last year. Now, fortunately for investors, collected revenue went up about 7%. And so the trainer maxim sort of comes in here. Because revenue went up faster than expenses by a little bit, net operating income went up about 7.5% last year, which was a pretty significant increase in our market. So when Meghan Trainor sings, "I'm all about that bass, no treble," she's really talking to us in the apartment industry. That is the Trainor maxim. I'm all about that bass, no treble, meaning the top line is clearly important. Revenue is critical. But expenses, the bottom line, the base, that's what it all comes down to. Because if the expenses sort of run amok, then you're really not going to see an increase in net operating income over the course of the year. And when we look at sort of the annual expense analysis we just did, we can see that the long-term trend over time has been for investors to put a lot more money into capital expenses, into making significant changes to the property through renovation. And basically, over the last 3 years, they've increased their capital expense budgets by about 11% compounded annually over the last 3 years. And so you wonder, well, why are investors willing to put this kind of money into renovation? In a lot of cases, we're seeing them go in and take an older property and put in really much more modern finishes, more hard surfaces, and just sort of upgrade the property to be more like what you see in new construction. And how can that pay off for an investor? Well, one thing to look at is the rent difference between new construction and older properties. And this chart shows you, the average rent, the lower line, the blue line, shows you the average rent in city Seattle properties built before 2000 compared to the average rent for properties built after 2000. And right now, and pretty much for most of those years, there's about a 40% differential. And so there's a lot of money being left on the table simply because the property's getting older and a little tireder and doesn't have all the features of new product. That's not, we contend, that's really not true. The median statistic, that's true, but again, you've got the geezers leaving the workforce at higher paid jobs, then millennials coming into the workforce at lower paid jobs. But within each group that's coming into the workforce, we think that there's been more job growth. And you're clearly seeing it in the kind of rents in the apartment market and the fact that people are still able to qualify for those units, even though we've had rent growth. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a forecast. It's preliminary. We're really not coming out with our spring forecast until early April. We're still in the middle of our research. And actually, there's 3 rules of forecasting. The first rule is don't, which is really practical. The second rule is if you do, then do it often so you can correct your mistakes. And so I'm going to show you what our current forecast, which is from December, and then we'll correct those mistakes in a few weeks. And then the third rule of forecasting is the most important of all. Don't. But I am, and so I'm going to give you 3 forecasts. First forecast is our vacancy rate forecast. I think our spring data is going to be similar to what I'm showing you here. Basically, vacancies are going to climb slowly this year overall. We treat vacancies 2 ways, the market vacancy rate and a gross vacancy rate. The top line is the gross rate. The market vacancy rate only counts vacancies in apartments that are already sort of in the market. They've already gone through their initial lease up. But when you have so much new construction in the market, it's logical that there are going to be more vacancies. When a 100-unit property opens up, well, on day 1, it's not 100% full, or even 90, or even 50. And so it just takes time. And so that is the gross vacancy rate, which is the top line. The most important one for us is the bottom line, which is the market vacancy rate. So the market vacancy rate last year was a little under 4%. It's going to edge up towards 5% this year. and jump towards 6% next year, and finally sort of nudge up to almost 7% in 2017.